In 1620, while the Mayflower was in Provincetown, 18 of its men sailed in a small shallop, searching for a place to live. They came to present-day Eastham, where they were met by a group of Nauset. After a brief but violent encounter, the English left towards today's Plymouth. In 2020, we remember this first encounter. We explore its meanings for today and tomorrow.
Good evening. Welcome to the Eastham Sunset Series. I'm pleased to introduce Heidi Scheffler, who teaches in middle school and is a longtime student of local history.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you to the Eastham 400 Committee for inviting me to speak to you for this series. We're going to start by looking at a synopsis of the first encounter origin story as recounted by Dr. Ian Saxon in the book commissioned for 2020 by the library. So at this point in our story, the Nauset people have become aware that the English are present in the neighborhood around today's Provincetown, Truro, and Eastham, and they're not looking to leave right away. They've started, quote, digging up the food, burglarizing the homes, and even robbing the dead, unquote. The Nauset do not want these new neighbors to stay and begin preparing for battle both physically and spiritually. They arouse fear in the English by making cries in the night, then attack them in the morning as they're loading up their shallop off of First Encounter Beach. With the same cries of the night coupled with volleys of arrows. Though the Nauset outnumber the English by about 2 to 1, and English muskets in this context are not as deadly as Nauset arrows potentially are, it seems no blood is shed. Dr. Saxon recognizes that the Nauset goal is probably not to eliminate the English, but rather to drive these foreigners away. They succeed in their goal, though only partially, as the Pilgrims settle not far enough away in Plymouth across the bay. The Englishmen on their side feel they have won the battle as they watch the Nauset retreat before making their haphazard way blown across the bay in a storm-broken boat. So following on this story, I'd like to talk about what the first encounter story as recounted by Dr. Saxon might have to offer us on this D-Day. I'd like to start by telling you about an important influence on the way I think about freedom. The stories of D-Day and the story of the first encounter are both very often framed as stories of the quest for freedom, a freedom that must be competed for, fought for, gone to battle for, and of course, ultimately gone to war for. For the Nauset and the Pilgrims, each side's necessary freedom is negotiated. There are cries and brandishing of weapons and sounds of guns exploding, but no one is killed, and eventually we learn to be neighbors, however clumsily, however short-lived. Violence will accelerate and seem to have the final word. Certainly one of the harshest final words that we have ready story for can be found in the horror of the Nazi extermination camps, the violence that made those men at D-Day willing to lose their own lives in order to eliminate it forever from the face of the earth. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian neurologist, psychiatrist, and Holocaust survivor, experienced 4 concentration camps, unknowingly escaping the gas chamber at Auschwitz by surreptitiously switching lines to join the people he knew in the right line. He articulates his notion of inner freedom in his most famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. He writes that he has witnessed that inner freedom cannot be lost, incredibly, even in the context of those unspeakable conditions, where one imagines that loss of freedom must be complete. It is this spiritual freedom that cannot be taken away, which gives us responsibility and makes life meaningful and purposeful. So I'd conclude if our most essential freedom is inner and cannot be lost, it also cannot be competed for, fought for, gone to battle for, or gone to war for. It must be received. It's a gift. It's freely given to all. But tyranny does exist, and loss of liberty is real. So we might differentiate liberty and freedom by speaking of desire. Liberty is the ability to do as one desires, as opposed to freedom, which is ontological or connected to our very being. Going back to our first encounter story, we read that prior to it, the Pilgrims pilfered Nauset corn, burglarized Nauset homes, and looted a Nauset gravesite. We read that Governor Bradford, when telling the story much later, thanked God for divine providence saving their party from hunger and perhaps death. The story from one perspective is of a people tyrannized by a power that refuses the exercise of their religious liberty. When they arrive in the Promised Land, God shows his favor through his divine providence, and the pilgrims give thanks. They are graced in relationship with their Creator. It is easy to see in this brief portrait that both sides in the first encounter have experienced tyranny or oppressive power. One side is fleeing tyranny from abroad, the other is experiencing tyranny from the tyrannized. Both have experienced loss of liberty, and both are in relationship with the divine from whom they seek guidance and receive gifts. Desire to be free of tyranny is natural and understandable by all, and grace is abundant when we are in relationship to God. But grace must be precluded or stunted when desire stops short of entering into relationship with our neighbor, when our neighbor is forgotten, overlooked, or made invisible, and when our whole beautiful, grace-filled story is built upon this forgetting, this overlooking, or this making invisible. How far do we go in the wrong direction when we confuse our desire for liberty with the freely given freedom that gives life meaning, which we then wrongly feel the need to compete for, fight for, and even go to war for? To end on a more personal note, I know that I'm a person that sees the corn lying there, thinks it's a gift from God to me, and I praise him. I have forgotten my neighbor every day. My family came to this place as McNamara's, Schefflers, Weilers, Valberries, Harveys, Olives, and Hills. Culturally, the Olives and the Hills and the Harveys won, with a little Valberry thrown in for fun. The McNamaras with their priests and nuns, the Scheffler Weilers with their Ignatiuses and their Mary Magdalenas faded right into the background until they barely existed anymore. We had become wasps, and my liberal guilt sent me setting up walls meant to help me survive. When I attended the opening ceremonies for the Eastham 400 events, I was touched to tears by this fundamental meeting of Native and non-Native neighbors that had seemed to me a lifetime in coming. Finally, two sets of neighbors with absolutely parallel narratives that seemed crazily never to meet, living in the same place with different names, were together in public official acknowledgement, strong, loving, forgiving. How could this be the first time? Annawan Whedon signed my copy of Ian Saxon's Story of His People and asked me if I knew my heritage. I do. I'm kind of fascinated by it, but it's not enough. It's a good starting point, perhaps. It feels good, anyway. But how can we be neighbors who don't forget? So I'm so grateful for the Eastham 400 Commemorative Committee and all their sponsors and participants who are working to help us walk into the answers together. We cannot do it alone.
My name is Annaholic, and I'm the coordinator for the Sunset Series with Eastham 400. I want to start by saying thank you for your support of this project. As this project moves forward, we are hoping to involve local students and have already reached out to some students at Nauset High School. If you or someone you know is a local high school or college student who's interested in participating in this project, please reach out to me at jholic@gmail.com. We will provide you with a script to read that reflects upon the so-called first encounter between Mayflower passengers and the Nauset 400 years ago, as well as its significance and lasting impact today. We are excited to bring these videos to you each day this summer, 15 minutes before sunset. Visit www.eastham400.org or the Eastham 400 channel on YouTube to see each of our videos as they're posted daily. Thank you.